Assemble, football fans. The GOAT podcast is back. Welcome to the Club Series. I am Jack Lacey, and both myself and my co-host Tom Beattie could not be more excited to be bringing you the new series of the GOAT podcast. As we've said before, we're going to be taking a look at some of the biggest football clubs in Britain, debating and finding out who are their greatest players of all time. Our first club that we're going to be giving the GOAT analysis to is Everton. So Everton are going to be the first club to kick off this series. We've got some great guests lined up, and just as a little preview clip, we thought we'd offer a taster of things to come. So here is a little snippet of our first Everton episode, which was with David Prentice, a fantastic guest to kick off the new series. David is the Liverpool Echo's head of sport and a vastly experienced Merseyside sports journalist, and was the perfect guest to kick off the Everton mini-series. He also has recently released a book, A Grand Old Team to Report, 45 Years of Following Everton Football Club, which was released last October. We did chat about that a little bit in the podcast, but for now, let's just dive into it and give you a little taste of things to come in Series 2.
Papers were not they still are today, but obviously in a different format. But so certainly back then they were hugely influential, and I was very fortunate to be invited into the training ground literally on a daily basis. I would go down there to speak to the manager, and depending on who that manager was, very often you'd be invited upstairs and have a cup of tea, a bit of toast, and as a result you forge relationships with these managers that become enduring, and you get a little bit of a privileged insight into the way that they're thinking. They start to trust you more because they're seeing you every single day, and they appreciate the difference between like the local media and maybe the national media, and so you forge these lasting relationships. Nowadays that doesn't happen because the media demands on football clubs are enormous. We're invited down the Echo once a week to a press conference where we have to take our turn with all the other media, and we do get other opportunities to speak to the manager and to speak to players, but nowhere near as regularly or as intimately as I was allowed to do so. And as a result I managed to get very, very entertaining stories like my relationship with Peter Johnson, which was a little surreal because so Peter's partner at the time was an old school friend of mine at Formby High School, which could cause one or two interesting moments. So I'm totally aware of the fact that the media landscape has changed massively in the space of 1987. I started on the Daily Post, so in the space of over 30 years, and not always for the better, unfortunately.
I mean, it's funny for me and Jack, who've moved into it this year, and I'd imagine it's just a completely different landscape. We sort of, that's all we know really, isn't it, Jack? But I think what we're going to hear today is sort of a real insight into the past, isn't it, Jack?
Well, and I think that's what perhaps excites me most about having David on today is that it's the getting to cover that such a long period, because so often when we've brought this topic up before, and we invite different guests on, we don't mind it, but certain guests will stick to their own rules of, I didn't see such and such play, or I can't judge this team, etc. So when you've got someone who's covered such a great scope of the club's history, that's like I just think it's going to be really interesting to see what choices come out today.
It's quite terrifying actually when you think back on it. I look at the number of games that Everton have played in their history, and 1975 was my first match, Easter Monday, 1975 against Coventry as a supporter. I've probably actually physically seen, I think it's something like 25-30% of the matches the club's played, which and I'm 57, I'm not ancient, so it's quite terrifying. So privileged in one respect, but also quite worrying in others.
Absolutely, and you've seen such a breadth, I think, of obviously the glory days, if you like, it in the 80s, and hopefully for Everton fans, the glory days, you'd imagine, with all the investment and obviously the new stadium, a world-class manager, great players, it might be on the horizon again.
I'm hoping so. I mean, Carlo Ancelotti is a magnificent selection as manager. For a long time, I was writing columns basically talking about how Everton need to be ambitious in their managerial appointments. I understand why they went for managers like Ronald Koeman and Marco Silva, very, very different in terms of experience. But really, so Everton should be appointing A-list managers, so elite level managers, managers who've achieved things and won things. And I was arguing the case for Rafa Benitez and for Jose Mourinho, neither of whom, for very different reasons, were going to be approached by Everton. But when they actually did attempt to bring in Carlo Ancelotti, I was thrilled, and I'm still thrilled that he's the Everton manager now, because he's only been there 5 minutes. He's only had effectively one transfer window to operate in, and we're already seeing tangible signs of progress. So I'm hoping that will be a very long and fruitful partnership.
And it's such a fascinating club, isn't it, Jack, in terms of just sort of the history of the club, and I think that it has such a unique place, I think, in the pantheon of the great clubs in England, really, doesn't it, in terms of obviously its domestic prowess, two eras of football, really, in semi-recent times in the 60s and 80s.